The awakening has spread even to Oshkosh and thousands of U.S. cities in the Occupy movement. And to all the protest movements, the same question applies: who can blame them? So as I wonder, like I do every year at this time, about how the unknown days and weeks and months will fill the year, this year, unlike any other time, I sense that the answer to how 2012 will unfold lies in the streets. The streets around the world where people confront the real-life happiness machine, which are the structures and institutions of society. They produce food, clothing, cars, McMansions, resorts, an accumulation of things, and more, most damaging of all, they produce law and order to protect the happiness of the few. The happiness machine does not make many people happy. And the dross of poverty, oppression, ghettos, unemployment, no health care, has driven tens of millions of people from various cultures and religions and ethnicities around the world to protest strongly despite the violent efforts to dismiss their concerns. A global effort has sprung into existence, one that refuses to accept the inequities as they exist and have existed. It feels to me like turning against the world of our fathers. What has been acceptable in terms of violating human dignity will no longer be tolerated. I think someday we'll be able to point to the previous year, 2011, as the time the world order was unplugged. Habits, traditions, and authority no longer hold the center. There may not yet be a clear understanding of how change will be executed, and it may be defined differently by different cultures. But at this point, we simply do not understand the evolution of revolution taking place, be they in other cultures or even our own. My good friend John Dober wrote in his blog the other day that we can no longer discern good guys and bad guys. He wrote, "If we and NATO landed in the Middle East, we'd have no idea whom to shoot and whom to protect. We don't know enough to understand our interests and the limits of our power. We don't like being spectators, but maybe the takeaway from this year is the international version of the Hippocratic Oath: first, do no harm." We can only hope to apply this to a new and changing world. I'm astounded by the common goals in the global movement. Historically, we'll recall, those who were discontent with things as they were in society ran off to form their own utopian society. Of course, these never worked past a couple of very lean years. So the acceptance of things as they are, with few exceptions, rules the mindset. Essentially, the prevailing reality means happiness for a few and the consequence of dross for the masses. And just like the fable, the occupiers around the world have a new vision, and the stockholders in the happiness machine turn a deaf ear and a blind eye, or in fact, feel compelled to squelch any unruly disturbance. Now, the turbulence of youth is not a new invention. What gives today's movement such poignancy is that globalization itself, globalization initiated to produce ever new economic markets by exploiting the poor worldwide. This globalization now has triggered a global movement among those who have suffered at the hands of those who control the happiness machine. These happy people have been knocked for a loop. Many despots this past year thrown from their thrones, more happy people to follow. The world that was has lost its balance. The tipping points are many. Warfare with drones and shock and awe and collateral damage doesn't cut it anymore. Poisoning the earth, the air, the water, precluding a future for younger generations doesn't cut it anymore. Greed and the illusion of buying happiness while filling the ghettos with dross doesn't cut it anymore. Unemployment and poverty, no health care, homelessness, hopelessness doesn't cut it anymore. Profits gained at the risk of worker safety and the health of the general public doesn't cut it anymore. Change is explosive. It contains many components of fear and anxiety. When you think about it, it couldn't be any other way. If we have to change our whole way of life, which is what is being demanded, we would naturally become upset and feel kind of off-kilter. Eric Hoffer, part philosopher, part longshoreman, author of The True Believer, sheds some light to help us understand, I think, our current situation. He said, "We used to think that revolution is the cause of change. Actually, it's the other way around. Revolution is a byproduct of change. Change comes first, and it is the difficulties and irritations inherent in change that set the stage for revolution." Now, the inequality, the whole issue of inequality between rich and poor has been dealt with as a moral and spiritual concern going back to the Old Testament prophets. Accumulated wealth at the expense of others falls into the same category. What may be different now is the scale and proportion of these inequities. The gap in global incomes between the richest and poorest countries was around 3-to-1 in the year 1820, 45-to-1 in the year 2005. The life expectancy of a child from England is 78. A child from Ethiopia is looking at a life of about 48 years. We're also dealing with the climate crisis, where physical harm, such as ecological exclusion of the poor by drought and flood, is ignored by the leaders of rich nations who are beholden to those who seek extreme accumulation of wealth. The economic theory these days, despite the high-risk activities of banks and multinational corporations that cause them to become unglued to satisfy inconceivable levels of personal greed, the theory still today is that individuals and nations are advanced when these same corporations and investment banks are freed from legally enforceable responsibilities such as paying a living wage, paying public taxes, or providing and respecting a healthy environment. And thus, countries around the world face enormous debts, environmental degradation, increasing joblessness, and rising poverty. And so people have taken to the streets around the world, and who can blame them? I always liked William Sloane Coffin's rhetorical question, why is it that when the wealthy take from the poor, it's an economic plan, and when the poor try to take from the wealthy, it's class warfare? Let me remind you, in case you didn't notice as I was reading the fable has no ending. It simply concluded that, well, yes, some wanted to build an even bigger happiness machine in order to deal with the crisis they were facing. Others wanted to see that the happiness machine was not the solution to their problems, but the cause. They wanted to reduce the size of the machine or even dismantle the machine altogether. Some even began to wish they could join together with the unhappy people to find solutions to the problem and build a whole new society. So the end of the story has not yet been written, and the end will probably not be written in 2012, but we may catch a glimpse of how the story might end. And at some point, we ourselves will have to decide our role in this huge global change. Build a bigger machine, a smaller machine, dismantle the machine, or build a new society. So we as individuals, and as part of a progressive religious congregation, will surely be making some key decisions in this coming year. Now, I am not being facetious in wishing you a Happy New Year. What I mean by a Happy New Year is, yes, I hope there will be joy amongst all of us, but also to reflect that this is going to be a time where we will engage in a year which will prove really quite interesting, with many profound and countless changes. And rather than just stand by as observers, perhaps we can help write the ending to the fable, which is, of course, the real story of our world.